So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Francesco from the Developer Relations team at Palo Alto Networks.
And I'm Steven Serrato with the Developer Relations team.
So today we're going to talk for the next 3 or 4 hours about developing applications for the application framework. We were told that it's the last session of the day, so you're actually locked in. So how many of you are developers or know how to develop software or things of that sort? Okay, about half of you, okay. So we are going to talk about the application framework in general, why it's important to us, why we believe it's an interesting solution, and which tools are available today to create an applications for the application framework. And we'll show some demos and some user experiences, partner experiences. Let's try to keep interactive, ask questions, etc. So before we get into the details, let's talk about why we believe that the application framework is important. Because today there are lots of security vendors, lots of security solutions, lots of data, and it's hard for a company to make sense of all that information, all those vendors, and use the unique value that each vendor, each solution provides, and automate the containment and prevent the successful incidents. So what we want to do is to provide a way to allow companies to quickly adopt new technologies, our technologies, but also third-party technologies for our partners, our competitors, and be able to use them in their environment, but also without reinventing the wheel every time. So without having to operate a new infrastructure for storing the information, collecting the data, deploying agents, and so on. And also trying to make sure that all the information that we aggregate can be used cooperatively among all these different solutions, so you can actually get the signal out of a vendor and be able to operate based on that signal without having to create custom orchestrations every time. So we believe that the answer and the solution is the application framework. And you heard a lot about this on the keynotes, etc. So I'm not getting into too many details what it is, but the idea is that the information that is produced by the Palo Alto Networks, firewalls, endpoint agents like Traps, cloud solutions such as Aperture, Evident, Redlock, etc., is sent to the login service into the application framework. And so this data is stored on your behalf, of course, if you want to. And that's just a value by itself. So we provide a way to store data at a good price point. But what we believe is really important is that we can add and enrich that information with the threat intelligence we provide, the applications that we provide, such as Magnifier that allows to do user behavior analytics. And more importantly, we allow you as customers and other vendors, if you allow them to access this information through APIs. So this means that the whole amount of data that the firewalls and Traps, etc., produce, if you save them to the login service, by using the application framework, you can enable your developers within your company or third-party developers or vendors to consume that information and make sense out of it. So, and we will hear about this from a couple of partners, the story of vendors that can easily build applications that can consume this data and provide you unique value. We have lots of different use cases. Actually, when we started, we announced this over a year ago, but when we really started working on this, we had a few initial use cases in mind. We were thinking about analytics. We were thinking about security automation and orchestration. But working with vendors and partners, discussing use cases, we found out that there is much more. So we really don't know how broad are the possibilities for us to achieve value with this platform, because each vendor, each customer can come in and say, hey, I would like to do this with this information, and they're able to do so in a frictionless way. So we think that this is really powerful, and again, there are several use cases available now, and there are more that are either being built or will be available. And you as customers will be able to build your own analytics or other use cases based on the data and the APIs we provide. Any questions so far? OK. So let's quickly look at which components are available as part of the application framework today. Obviously, there is much more coming, but this is what we have today. So the first thing is the Cloud Services Portal or Application Portal or App Portal. The idea is that if you're a Palo Alto Networks customer and you go to apps.paloaltonetworks.com, you will see this portal. I'm going to show you. You will see which Palo Alto Networks applications are available, but also which third-party applications are available. Today, as of today, we have 6 third-party applications available, generally available. Obviously, there will be many more, and you can just go to the portal and see them. The idea is that if you are a login service customer, you will be able to seamlessly activate these applications, and if you want, obviously, you can give them access to your data. And this means that they can start producing analytics, responses, etc., based on that information. And if you look at a little bit more detail at how it works behind, so the user experience is very seamless. You go on the portal, you activate an app, there is an authorization process, and then the app is able to consume the APIs. But what happens behind the scenes for whoever wants to build an application like you or the third party is that there are a number of services and APIs that are available to consume this information. One is called login service. So as I mentioned, the data comes in from the different Palo Alto Networks products and solutions into this login service that as a customer you can buy. It's licensed by terabyte, by amount of log ingested. And this provides an API called Login Service API, obviously, but it's not the only one. And this API allows you to search, to provide queries on top of the data. So we will see some examples. You can write a SQL-like queries on top of this data and get results. So you can look at whatever, traffic logs, threat logs, traps logs, what we call enhanced application logs that contain more data about MAC addresses, DNS requests, HTTP headers, URL filtering. There is lots of information there. It's good security information because it's structured, so it's not something that it's randomly assembled, but it's data that we produce, so it's meaningful, it's security data. And applications can read this information and make sense of it, and they can also write. So we allow third-party applications also to write structured data back in case they want to do enrichment, in case they want to save some data in the application framework. So this is one of the APIs that we provide. And this is used typically if you want to search for something in the data lake. I want to see in the last 3 hours if this IP ever show up in my firewall logs. I want to see the most recent threats in the last hour. We'll see some examples of that. Another service that is also based on the data that we write in the login service is called event service. It's based on the same data, but it's meant for a different type of consumption, which is more a streaming real-time consumption. So the idea is that you can define a filter upfront saying, I'm interested in all the logs that are threats and the severity is, I don't know, critical. And you set this filter upfront, and then you just keep polling and get all the new events that match that criteria. So you're not searching in the past. You're just defining what you're interested in, and then you keep polling to get only that information. This is very useful for applications that need to react quickly and consume data in almost real time. So again, that's another way to interact with our APIs. The last service is called Directory Sync Service. And again, it's meant for solutions that need to know about the user, the Active Directory user and group information. So again, the consumption model is that you don't have to deploy agents and sensors and tabs from third parties in order to get access to the data. You can just use Palo Alto Network services and firewalls and agents to get the information that you need. So many companies might need some information about users and groups. And how can you provide them such information without having an agent? So we provide that for them as well if you want. So you can deploy what we call the Directory Sync Service Agent that talks to your domain controllers and fetches user information and attributes, user to group mapping. It doesn't fetch passwords, so we are not storing your passwords in our cloud. But this information can be also made available to the application. So for example, our Magnifier app, which is our user behavior analytics app, looks at the network data to find anomalies, and then it's able to use this service to know which user generated that data and which groups this user is part of, and so on. So these are the 3 services that are available today. And on top of the application portal, this is what the app framework does today. Any questions? OK. The next thing I want to talk about quickly is the authorization workflow. So as I mentioned, it's very, 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 very important for us not to give away customer data. So you are the customer, you own the data, you are in control. The data, if you're using login service, stored in our data centers, so it's compliant, we respect GDPR, etc. So data is safe, and only when you want to give access to your data to a third-party vendor, only then they can get access to that data. So we want to make sure that, again, your data is not going anywhere. And so to do that, we're using Auth2, which is a standard protocol for authorization. Many applications use it. And the idea and the workflow that I'm going to show is that you, as the customer, you go to the application portal at Palo Alto Networks. You say, I want to use the Setclytics application, which is available on the portal today. So you activate it. So you tell us that you want to use that application. Then you will log in into that application, and you'll authorize that application to access your data. So it's something that you need to do explicitly. It's very easy to do it. It's web-based. I'll show you a demo. But you have to do that. And only then that application is capable of accessing your data through the APIs we provide, only until you want that to happen. I mean, you can always remove the authorization anytime, and the application will not be able to access your data anymore. So this is basically what we do. And again, just to show you the life cycle of an application, the first stage is the registration, where we actually register a third-party app in our portal. So that's what we do with our partners. While we build the application, we test the application, verify that they are compliant. They have to sign legal agreements. They have to provide InfoSec requirements. They have to pass our developer relations validation, which is hard to pass. And then the life cycle is you can activate the application, you can authorize the application, then the application can access the data through the APIs. And as a customer, you can also deactivate that app. And Steven will talk about our SDK that provides developers, so as you as a customer or a third-party partner, easy abstractions to consume these APIs for authorization and access very quickly. So I'm going to show you the activation part of an app. In this case, we build that application. I'm not a developer, but I build it. So if I can do it, anyone can do it. And so the idea is that on the right side, you have the application framework that, again, is collecting data from firewalls, endpoint, and cloud. And we wanted to create an interface to the Microsoft Graph Security API. So this is not generally available, but it's in tech preview. So if you, as a customer, you want to use that, just contact us, and you can do it. The Graph Security API is an API provided by Microsoft that aggregates security data from all the Microsoft security products and also third parties. So the idea is that if you know Microsoft, you have like, I don't know, 20 security products. And what if you want to consume an alert from one of those products? You don't want to go to the console or the logs of each one of them. So they created this API that you can query and get the alerts from all the security products that you own from Microsoft. And this API supports also third parties in a federated model. So we created a connector that allows you to get the logs and the alerts from the application framework so they can show up in the Security Graph API as well. Again, we don't want to get into too many details of this, but let me just show you a demo of the activation flow. Can we please switch the screen? OK, so this is our application portal. You see some applications are activated, some of them here in the catalog. This is our sandbox environment, so not all the applications that you see here are publicly available. Some of them are. So in this case, I want to use this Security Graph API integration. So I want to enable it. I'm a customer. I'm using login service. I want to activate this. So I just put an instance name of this application. I choose the region. Obviously, I didn't mention that we have data in multiple regions, so you can store data in Americas, in Europe, depending on your requirements. In this case, this data is in Americas. I have multiple instances that are connected to different panoramas. So I just do this, fill in this form. And right now, I'm activating the Microsoft app on our portal. So what's happening right now in the backend, we are doing some orchestration to create the filters and all the information that we need to do in our backend to allow this application to consume our APIs for this specific customer, which in this case is me. So I refresh the page, and now it's showing up as one of the applications that are enabled. I click on the application, and I get redirected to another UI outside of the Palo Alto Networks app portal. In this case, I'm logging in with Microsoft credentials. Again, this is a Microsoft app, so it's integrated with the Microsoft credentials. I'm going through all the single sign-on, obviously, multi-factor authentication. So I was logged in as Palo Alto Networks, and now I'm logged in the application as with Microsoft user. This application doesn't have access to my data yet, has been activated but has not been authorized yet. So I just click on this button, and again, this is my UI, but your application can look different, but the idea is that you have to give consent to access the data. So as you can see on the top left, I'm saying, I'm giving this Microsoft Graph Security API is requesting permission to read data from login service and read data from event service. It's not asking permission to write. It's not asking permission to read directory sync service data, just event and login. And I say allow, and the application is authorized. Again, I'm not showing the details of the application. The purpose I wanted for this specific demo is just to show you how easy for you is to deploy a new application integrated with App Framework. If you want to do a POC, as long as you know what you're doing, you know what are you activating, you know who are you giving consent to, which you should know, it's very easy. 5 minutes, this application has access to your data now. And if you don't want to do that anymore, you want just to terminate it because you don't like the Microsoft application I wrote, you go here, you select the app, click on delete. Are you sure? Yes. And this application doesn't have access to your data anymore. So it's pretty straightforward. Any questions? OK, we can switch back to the other laptop, and Stephen will continue.
Thank you, Francesco. So now that we've had an overview of the application framework and the APIs, let's dive into the developer resources. So these are the resources that you would use to understand how to interact with the APIs and then actually do it. So this is an overview. So we'll be talking about the developer lab, the SDK, which Francesco mentioned earlier, API Explorer, which is a sample application, and then we'll also talk a little bit about the types of documentation that we make available to you or will make available. So the first thing we'll cover is documentation. So obviously, we have APIs. We have login service, directory sync service, and event service APIs. And so we provide API reference documentation to you so you can understand the different endpoints that are available for these APIs, how you interact with them, like what HTTP method do you use? Do they accept the payload? Do they accept URL query parameters, et cetera? What the response formats look like so that you can have an understanding of how you would go about parsing the responses in your application. The other things that we provide are getting started guides. So you may have seen the one for login service, which has been published for some time. And then coming very soon, we'll have a getting started guide for the application framework, which, among other things, will talk about some of the concepts that Francesco covered, right? So everything from like understanding the onboarding, activation flow, and authorization, and also a little bit about the Python SDK is in there as well. So in case you weren't already familiar with it, it's a great way to kind of understand, oh, there's an SDK available. Let me go find out more about it, because that might be a great way for me to jumpstart getting access to the app framework. And then lastly, coming soon, we're going to offer a developer community portal. And what this will be is a one-stop place for you to go to get access to all the resources that I'm going to cover, plus some additional tech blogs, maybe best practices, things that you would need to start working on your prototype, your application, or maybe you're just interested in writing scripts or just quickly interacting with the app framework. So do be on the lookout for that. And then hopefully to follow soon after that would be some videos and maybe some light boards. We'll see. So next up, let's talk about the SDK. So just high level, the SDK is written in Python. It's the only SDK that we offer at this time, but we do have plans later on to introduce the SDK in other languages. So as you can see, there's already one in Node.js that's coming soon as well. And so the SDK in itself is a language binding for the app framework, right? So it provides low-level coverage of the event service, directory sync service, and login service APIs. And what that means is that it's an abstraction of all the endpoints. And if you've worked at all with Python, you might know that it's a very readable language to understand. And so what I've also done here is I've packaged some example scripts that you can use to kind of quickly get an idea of what it's like to use the SDK to interact with the APIs. And I'll step through that for you in a little while in the next slides. And the other thing that it provides is some helper methods. So Francesco talked about polling the event service for records, and he also talked about polling the login service, right? After you perform a query, you want to see the results. So there's some helper methods made available to quickly do that. And they actually provide some mechanism for, like paginating through the results so that, you don't have to worry about that. And lastly, there is an OAuth 2.0 client built in, and it's packaged in what is called the credentials class, which is really just an abstraction for the authorization, but also the managing of the tokens as well. And so if you're familiar at all with OAuth 2, you might know that there is a concept of a refresh token and also an access token. And then you have client ID, client secret. So what this does for you is it manages it for you automatically out of the box. And so assuming that you have those credentials, you don't have to worry about applying what is called an access token to the authorization header. It does it all for you automatically. So let's look at some sample code. So in this first example, this snippet describes how you would interact with the login service to perform a really basic query. And we're really just selecting from panw.traffic, we're pulling back one log record. And so if you look on the top right there, as you can see, we're importing two classes, the login service class and the credentials class. And then we're passing the credentials class to the login service constructor object, which is the LS. And then we're also specifying what our payload is going to look like. And so if you look at the payload, we're specifying the actual SQL query that we're passing, start time, end time. And then finally, we just do an ls.query with that payload, and it performs a query for us. And then we can look at the results. So any questions about this? So the next example, it looks very similar, and this is intentional. So in this scenario, we're actually doing an event service poll. And we're polling the event filtered channel. And as you can see, it's set up almost exactly the same way. So it should be very easy to move from one service to the next because the constructors are pretty much identical to each other in terms of what they support, what they expect. And of course, we're passing the credentials because we need that access token in order to send the API request, right? And finally, this example is for directory sync service. And what we're doing in this example is we're counting all the users that are part of the example.com domain. And it's set up almost exactly the same way, unsurprisingly. And so if you're interested in viewing more examples, there is a repo available on GitHub that you can find. We can also link to it later. And there's a ton more examples that kind of go into a bit more detail, and they're a bit more fleshed out. Just wanted to give you an overview of what it's like to use PanCloud. So this snippet here illustrates what the credentials object is capable of. So what I've done here is I actually created a credentials object and assigned it to a variable called C. And then next up, I'm running a getCredentials method, which does exactly what it implies, returns back all your credentials. Below that, I'm using another method, which is called the code JWT payload. And what that does is we actually package the access tokens into a JSON web token. And if you're familiar with that, if you crack it open, there's some fields inside that might be interesting. In this case, the field that I'm most interested in is the EXP field, which tells us when the token expires. And so the next method checks to see if it's expired. In this case, it is. And so I perform a token refresh, and I check it again, and all of a sudden, it's not expired anymore, in which case the JWT is expired returns false. So all of this is built in there, and it's there for you to leverage however you wish. And if you don't want to be bothered by these implementation details, just leave it at the default, and it takes care of it for you. So next up, we'll talk about API Explorer. So this is the sample application that was written to end-to-end test the application framework, and also provide a way for you to interact with the application framework in a web UI, form. So it's built on top of PanCloud SDK, and the source code is also made available on GitHub. So if you just really quickly want to dive into some code to understand how you might build a web application, feel free to visit the API Explorer GitHub repo, and everything is in there from the OAuth 2 authorization all the way to actually sending the API requests to all the APIs that we talked about. And very soon, we'll have a multi-tenant version of it coming. And when that is released, you can expect to find API Explorer available on the app portal for you to activate and authorize to talk to one of your instances of login service or et cetera. All right. I'm all done. Were there any questions at all about what was covered? All right, so next up, we're going to invite some of our partners to come up here and talk about their experiences working on their integrations with the app framework. So we'll have Cyclytics come up, and then also Szybist to speak to you about their experiences. So I'm going to welcome. All right, and can we go ahead and switch the display? All right, great, thank you.
All right, my name is Victor Badour, the VP of Engineering at Cyclytics. So Cyclytics has been around since 2015, and what we do is we predict threats before they materialize into actual attacks. And the way we do this, we look at data from the infrastructure of the internet. We pull down BGP data, we pulled down IP registry information, we pulled down domain registry information, we pulled down passive DNS data, we grab all this data and we put it into our classifiers, and from there, we're able to bubble up networks that we believe will be involved in an attack in the next 30 to 90 days. So we have a dashboard that we've created, we have an APIs that people use and so forth, and we've developed an app to work with Palo Alto firewalls and the app framework. So this is basically how it all works. So you see here the things right here. Imagine these are companies with their devices sending all their data to Palo Alto logging service, right? Next, once the app is authorized, we can now pull information from the logging service, and we're able to correlate that with our predictions and all the other information that we have. Now, the cool thing is, once we have all that data, we can generate reports and so forth for the end user. But in addition to that, because we have that information coming from the end user, we can create customized predictions specific to that company. Now, as far as those predictions, we are then able to allow the company to provide, or allow us to provide enforcement to these companies by delivering an extended dynamic list specific to that company so that it can be installed on their firewall, and we can provide protection and enforcement. So as far as they said, can you tell us a little bit about your experiences with App Framework? So when this came out, I saw this when it was announced last year even, and I jumped on it probably when I first saw it. I emailed and they're like, well, we don't really have much of anything right now. Just come back to us in a few months and so forth. And so, once it was released, I think we were one of the first adopters of it in doing development. And so most of the issues that we came across were really, I think, growing pains. And as you can see here, the library, we've got the first library, then sometimes things would work, sometimes it wouldn't work. Changes to it would come, and so that was, as we'd have to check every so often to make sure it was there. Documentation at the time wasn't all there at the time, although there's tons of documentation now. And the service, yeah, it was up and down in the beginning. but you know, it's obviously it's released now. We have had no issues with the service at this point. So now as far as the pros, right? OAuth 2, as you heard Steve described it, and it is really simple to implement. In fact, it's probably one of the simplest interfaces that we've ever worked with. The library is pan-cloud now, very easy to work with. We were able to pull down data using the logging service stuff, and it worked great, no issues. Pulling data for large queries was actually something else that's really cool in that you could pull for data, but you could also get it in batches, which is really cool for us because the amounts of data that we're pulling is like quite a bit. And lastly is support. You know, Francesco, I remember specifically this. I was out on a Saturday night, and I got home like at 12:30 at night. And what do? I grab my laptop, and I try to do some stuff, and it wasn't working. And I go on Slack, and I sent a message. I'll see it on Monday. No, Francesco answered in like 15 minutes. Which is pretty crazy. So, but every time I've ever had a question, guys, whenever the team has had a question, we just send a message on our Slack channel, and we've gotten responses quickly. And everything works out in the end. And it's actually been, overall, I'd say it's been a really, really good experience. So, and I think that's it. Oh, the dashboard. Thank you. Good call. So, what is that not? I see. Let's see. Can you guys see this? You can see that. Excellent. So this is a sample of the dashboard that we have. So what you see here is we have a test Palo Alto device. We did all kinds of traffic through it. We were polling for logging information. You can see here that the top level says these are the IPs detected and IPs predicted. Now IPs detected, we actually collect a lot of general threat data, and we also compare that to show in the reporting and on the dashboard here to say, okay, this is the threat data that's matched in your firewall and devices and so forth. But in addition to that, we show the predictions. And so you can see here there's a number of predictions, and it shows the action, the IPs that were visited, and when the predictions were made. And I have a sample of what, if I clicked on one of these things, you'll see here, it shows the amount of bandwidth, and then some information about the particular IP address that was gone to. So the black dot on the timeline there indicates when a prediction was made, and you can see here about 2.5 months later, we started seeing threat feeds report that this IP address was used in some malicious fashion. And then we have some information about the sources, what the actions were, and the source, the destination, and the size, and so forth, and when it was seen. So far we're working with just the logging service, and we're working with IP addresses, although we do have, the API is full feature. There's a lot more stuff that we can do, and we'll be adding those in the next releases. And that's it.
Thanks, Victor. Also wanted to mention they were the first to be GA in our application portal by a few hours. So now they have 6 partners. The second one came like 3 hours later, but they were the first. So thanks. Thank you. So next up, Dimitri from Szybist. They are not generally available yet, but there is a reason for that.
Hi everyone, I'm Dimitri. I'm one of the co-founders of Szybist. This one. Yeah, can you hear me? Great. So there's wrong screen. So how I'm switching the screen?
Yeah, can you switch back?
How the switch works? Oh, okay, excellent. Thanks. So yeah, about Szybist. So we are from Canada, based in Canada, Toronto, and our company does a solution for IoT visibility and security. When we're looking at IoT, everyone today bringing new devices and connecting them to the network, building these devices. And the main purpose is to generate value from the connectivity of the devices. But we also know that it's a big problem with all of the botnets that we hear around us emerging on a daily basis. And actually, you cannot really generate value without effectively securing your Linux device. And that's where Szybist helps to customers and to device users. So when it comes to Szybist, what we actually bringing to our customers is an approach that's called secure by design. So helping them to build secure devices. We also helping them to protect and defend these devices while they're deployed in the field by neutralizing any threats and actually what's called the threat hunting. In addition, we're helping them securely to manage the lifecycle of the device, which connects us to the firmware upgrade functionalities, and also bringing back data from these devices in a secure manner and analyze this data about the device performance. When we came here on Sunday to be part of the hackathon, we had no clue what is application framework. We have heard about it, but we never seen it before, never worked with it before. And we then came into the hackathon and we said, okay, let's define a use case. And we told Francesco, hey, we want to implement this. We want to get out from here with something that actually works. And that was our target. And yeah, the use case that we came with is actually some inclusive security with threat impact visibility for networks that include IoT devices in these networks. So it will allow us to keep an eye on all IoT devices inside network, and not only the ones that were protected by Szybist. And yeah, then we moved forward to very interesting 2 days, kind of from idea to MVP in 2 days, and it included coding, design, APIs, Node, JS, authentication, workarounds, troubleshooting, beer, and a lot of security. And I want really to thank to you guys, Steven, Francesco, and Luigi, who's not here, that we couldn't pull this without you guys into such level. So thanks a lot. And yeah, and eventually, I think that it was quite easy to integrate. It was quite quick. We had all the tools. We were able to create what's very important in my eyes, a test environment where we can simulate different types of flows. That helps us move forward. The API was clear. Yes, there were a couple hiccups here and there, but they were all handled in a matter of hours, which is really impressive for a new product. And eventually, yeah, we have something working to show here for the first time. So I'll switch now to the other, the other side. So this is our, I would say, this is the history of a security incident that were detected by our system. And we can see that there are many incidents, but I'm going to look at a very specific one, which involves real Mirai botnet attack that infecting a device. So if you're looking at this device was infected. Of course, there is all the processes of reconnaissance, intrusion, infection, etc. But I want to focus on the Mirai itself. So that's the Mirai bot, that's the real thing running on this device. And when we're looking at the network of this device, now we can see our impact analysis functionality. And once we're clicking on that, what it will do, it will look at all of the network where this device is deployed, and it will try to see what other devices actually were infected by this botnet. And that's what we see here. So we can see that there is just one another device. We can see more details about every single connection that was made to the same command and control server of Mirai botnet. And also we can see here the spike of the connection, so we have some kind of feeling when it happened based on the timeline. But again, this is of course not a fully working product. It's just POC/MVP that we created in 2 days, which I think, well done, guys. I mean, we couldn't pull this off without such ease of integration on the framework we built. So, thanks.
Thank you, Dimitri. Yes. So what I wanted to say is, I think, look at these two solutions. Each one of them provides a different use case, a different value. And if you want to try one of them, you can just go to the app portal, do the activation flow that I showed before, and it's available. So think about today when you want to do a POC or a new security solution. So how long does it take? From the idea, oh, I have to deploy agents, I have to deploy a tap, I have to do this, I have to do that. This is really easy, right? So the idea of how we want to change the consumption model is exactly this. Allow all these vendors, partners, and competitors also to consume security information easily and quickly. And we have many more things coming in the future. So this is really the power of application framework. So there is one more thing we have for the day. So thanks for sticking with us until the end, which is I would like to show another quick demo on how we can create an Alexa skill that interacts with the application framework. So this is something we did for fun a few months back. Let's see if it still works. So can we switch to the other laptop, please? OK, so this is the Alexa Skill Developer Kit. Again, I don't want to get into too many details of this, but the idea is that you can define a skill, and you can say which type of sentences Alexa should understand. In this case, we want Alexa, she, it, I don't know, to understand how some phrases like how many severity threats did you see in the last duration, where you can say 1 hour, 3 hours, and you can specify the severity. And then this will invoke a Lambda function in AWS. So we created this Lambda function in Python, and this is the source code. I mean, again, this is about 300 lines of code, but because I'm not good at that, probably Steven will do that in 5 lines. But the part I wanted to highlight is, again, the credentials part. So this is using the Python SDK. Can you read? OK, so we're using the credentials. We're using the login service. And in this case, this is the query. So again, the Lambda function is passing us the severity and the start time and end time, depending on the interval that we specify. When we say 2 hours, 3 hours, basically Alexa will translate it in an interval, and then the function will translate it in seconds. So I calculate the end time as now, the start time as few seconds or hours from now in the past. And then we run a query, select count star from PenW threat, where severity equals the value that we want. And then obviously, this is the query, specify query, start time, end time. And this is where we get the data out, and we parse the result down here. Since we are just interested in the count, we are only interested in one field, which is inside the JSON response, and we return that. And then Alexa knows that, I mean, we construct a sentence that replies to this. So again, it's a few lines of code, pretty straightforward to do that. I didn't know anything about Alexa or the skills. I did that on the train when I was commuting to the office. And I basically downloaded a sample code in Python for Alexa, copy and paste this from the examples that Steven provided, change a few things without understanding what I was doing. And after a while, it worked. Back then. I don't know if it still works now. So let's see. So we can test this. So cross fingers. Hello, Alexa. Let's use the application framework.
Welcome to Application Framework. Please ask me about security in your environment.
How many critical severity threats did you see in the last 4 hours? Let's see what happens.
The total number of critical severity threats in the last 240 minutes is 1,653. Now, what do you want me to do about it?
How many unique users? That wasn't Alexa.
The number of unique users that generated critical severity threats in the last 240 minutes is 12. Now what?
Oops, sorry. Now what? Who is the worst offender?
The user with most critical severity threats is Ivan Boyer. And by far.
Ivan. Seriously? What did you do?
Why is it always me?
Block the offender.
With pleasure. Ivan Boyer has been blocked from the network. And I also filed an HR ticket to get him fired. Security, please escort Ivan Boyer out of the room immediately. Bam.
Sorry.
I don't get to see end of it.
No, sorry. So we can switch. Well, actually, no, the last thing I wanted to show is that obviously this is real. So these are the logs from the Lambda function. And you can, well, obviously, the last part was fake, but the query is, no, I mean, Ivan is terminated for real, but so these are the logs that we see, and the queries and the information, and this is actually the value, which is 12. This is coming back from the login service, so this is real. So can we switch back to the slides? And the only thing I wanted to say is that thank you. Thanks for sticking around until the end, and we have a few more minutes for questions, or otherwise, I hope you enjoy the Ignite, and see you next time. Any questions?